My name is Heather Cousin, and I'm the Library Services Director for the City of Thousand Oaks. And it is my pleasure to welcome you here today on behalf of the One City, One Book Committee. As you know, this community-wide book club began 11 years ago with the premise that when we open the book together, we close it in greater harmony. And we hope that we have brought a little bit more of that harmony to our community this year. Through our books, we've met people and places not too different from ourselves. These stories, our stories, can have an impact. They have the power to let us see into the lives of others, to feel, however briefly, what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. And just as in Miss Jiles' book, taking place in the wake of the brutal United States Civil War, appreciating another perspective is absolutely vital today. Excuse me. We were fortunate to partner with a number of different organizations on this year's One City, One Book, expanding our own perspectives and hopefully encouraging an even wider audience to journey with us. I'd like to recognize those organizations now. The Friends of the Thousand Oaks Library, the Thousand Oaks Library Foundation, California Lutheran University. Now, I would like to introduce someone who, in addition to joining us here today, made this year's One City, One Book events even more special. First, though, I would like to welcome and introduce Thousand Oaks Mayor Claudia Bill de la Peña.
It's hard to believe that it's been 11 years since we started this program, that our library staff encouraged us to join them on this journey of strengthening our community through literature, and I'm so very glad that they did. We've enjoyed inspiring lectures, informative discussions, and engaging entertainment. Today we gather together once again to learn about a time, place, and people not so different from ourselves. Through Miss Jiles' story, we explore what it means to be a family and the impact our decisions, both large and small, on those we love and those we may never meet. Today's program is a perfect example of how the power of great storytelling can bring us closer. So, on behalf of the entire City Council, I want to thank the committee who picked the book, coordinated the many programs, and led the discussions. And I want to thank all of you who are here today, who have supported One City, One Book over the past 11 years and enjoyed these author events. So again, thank you for coming and enjoy what will be a wonderful afternoon.
And now I will turn the podium over to our very special host, California Lutheran University President, Dr. Chris Kimball, who will introduce our author.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, think of the list. A divided country, a president who had never held elected office before and wildly unpopular in many places, tension and violence in race relations, deep concerns about immigration and ethnicity, allegations of vote fraud. For some, maybe even for some of you, that's the news of our world. But it was also news of the world in 1870. It was the dawn of a new industrial era. It was the year that John D. Rockefeller started Standard Oil. This novel brings us into that remarkable world through remarkable stories, remarkable people, and a remarkable journey. And so what I would like to ask you all to do now is to welcome to the stage and to the City of Thousand Oaks the author, the poet-novelist, Paulette Jiles.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I'm really grateful to the city and the library of Thousand Oaks for inviting me here and being patient with changing my plane flight plans 3 or 4 times. Vicki was very good about that, and it's wonderful to be here. It's a beautiful city, and this program of One City, One Book is a great thing for us authors because it gets more people buying and reading our books. But in general, reading is good for you, and I will go on about that in a little while. I live in outside of a little town in 80 miles west of San Antonio. And I rarely base my characters on actual people, or if they do, they soon leave that actual person, become their own person. They have to do that in order to be workable in a book, and I'll talk about that in a bit too. But there is one person in News of the World who is actually closely based on a real person, and that is Simon the Fiddler. I play the Irish tin whistle, to some people's regret, but I manage with a little bluegrass group, and we have a wonderful fiddler, and his name is Tom Bomer. And like many artists, he has to support himself and his very small Irish wife. He drives heavy equipment and front-end loaders and cedar clearing equipment, and he raises bees. And he's a natural biologist as well. And the natural world deeply interests him. And he's a great fiddle player. And when we were playing with our group, I learned so much about music when I learned to play the Irish tin whistle. And I can just glance at Tom with that fiddle under his chin, and he gives me a little nod, and he means take the instrumental break, which I do. But I didn't ask his permission if he wanted to be in a book. So I was sweating it there for a while. And we were at a rehearsal. I said, Tom, do you read? And he said, no, I don't, actually. And I said, oh, thank God, you know. I don't know whether he'd be pleased or upset. But he doesn't read fiction. He reads tons of books about heavy equipment and about bees. Less about bees now that they're all dead, but unfortunately, poor Tom. And he comes in very depressed because his bees are all dead. But so these are the wonderful characters that I see every day and I talk with every day and sometimes end up in the book. And people ask me if there's going to be a sequel to News of the World, but it's probably going to, that character of Simon the Fiddler has deeply interested me, and I'll probably go on with that. But so many people and the panels that you all have held here on News of the World have been so thorough, so interesting. Stories about Old Conejo, which I really would have loved to have heard. And studies on the news reports of the time. I think that instead of going into the content, and I think some of the questions that people have handed up here are about the content of the book, I would like to speak about the process of writing itself. And since we're talking about one city and one book, and we're talking about books and reading in general, I want you to reflect on these things, and it may take you to some interesting places. And one is that writing is in itself the least sensual of occupations, because if you have music, for instance, you're playing an instrument and you immediately get noise of some kind. Sometimes it's not so great, but you get some kind of noise and you're struggling to bring out a tune or a melody, and when you reach it, it's so sensually satisfying because this is what you've been trying so hard to do. When you're doing the plastic art, you have stuff in your hands. You have clay to make sculpture with, or you're using paint and you're looking at colors. And then there's the collaborative arts of film and theater, and you're working with other people, and you're working on a stage with lights and sets. So it's all very, it hits one and sometimes all of the 5 senses. And the only thing that, besides writing, which has no physical or sensual input, might be, no, writing is the only thing. I was thinking maybe dance or singing, but You're not working with any instrument at all. Maybe it's a keyboard, yeah, you're working with a keyboard and you've got a computer, or you're scribbling, by hand, but still it's all happening in your head. You have to bring forth an entire world with words alone. And we, of all the beasts on this earth, we are the only ones with language, the only ones. Other animals dance. Some animals build beautiful things. Birds pluck out their feathers and build beautiful nests. They sing. But human beings are the only ones that use language. So there's something very, very special and actually quite strange and a bit mysterious about that. Because that's all I have to bring you the entire world of Texas in 1870. I've got no sight, I've got no sound, I cannot provide you with music. I can tell you about music, but I can't bring it to you. All I have is words. That's the sole thing that I have. And you begin to learn after a while the incredible magic of the human language and human imagination. So think about that. Think about the things that have come down to us. For instance, Psalms, the beautiful Psalms, those are language. We do not know how they were sung. Right now I'm rereading El Cid, the wonderful epic El Cid, and I'm reading it in the original 11th century Spanish. And I know those lines were sung, but the music has not come down to us. What has come down to us have been the words. So this is all a writer has, and you either succeed or fail, or sometimes you do it halfway, to bring you the world of 1870. And this was all that the singer had, the singer of El Cid, to bring you the world of El Cid Conquistador. And this is all that Shakespeare had to bring you the world of Midsummer Night's Dream. In fact, he was writing with a quill pen with candlelight. Have you ever tried to write with a quill pen? It's not easy. It's not even very pleasant. So writing in itself, even about dance, even about singing, and I love to sing, I sing alto, beyond anything is, I hate to say intellectual, but it's entirely and completely in the mind. So you really have to learn your tools very, very well. You cannot simply start splurging on the page and expressing yourself. You have to learn your tools. And sometimes you can learn from other disciplines like music. You want a symphonic feel. And I know I'm getting technical here, so excuse me, get the hook if I go on for too long. But you want to move from direct scenes and you want to balance that with narrative summary. The last few pages of News of the World is entirely narrative summary. And that's a tool that it's taken me a long time to learn, and I will not go on about it. But for the human imagination, writing and books demand the most because there is the least sensual input. When you're listening to music, you're caught up in it, and it can be it's not in any language, and it's the same of art. But books are the most demanding things, and yet they are the most absorbing, and they are reluctant to let you go. Books want you, they want souls, and you are forced to give up your soul. When you read a really, really good book like Les Miserables, if you have read that, you know there are passages in that book that you carry around for days that you cannot get away from. The wonderful scene of Cosette going to the well. There are many, many bits in books I know that you know and that you love. So think about that and think about how very different it is. And I have no conclusions to make about it. It's just somewhat mysterious that has been something that I have been born to do. I knew I was born to do it when I was 11 years old. This is what I had to do, was to tell stories. And the life of the imagination is absolutely vital. It is like, and I have said this many times, it's like one of the 4 food groups. You know, we were all taught when we were younger that there are 4 important food groups. There's proteins and carbohydrates and so forth and so on. But it's the same for the human mind. You must have a time when you're moving into the world of the imagination. I live there. I live there 4 and 5 hours a day. But for you and for all human beings, we must move into the imagination. We have to be able to distinguish that from that which is not of the imagination. And so it's like the 4 food groups. You have to have part of that to refresh your mind, to enliven it, to deepen it. And for Texans, of course, the 4 food groups are chili, chili, steak, and pie. So everybody understands what I'm talking about. So I live there 4 and 5 hours a day, and I arrange things in my mind. I can bring up shelves and shelves and shelves like some kind of a strange solitary librarian of material that I need. I wrote a book called The Color of Lightning, which is about Britt Johnson, an African-American frontiersman whose wife and children were captured by the Kiowa and the Comanche. And he got them back single-handed. He was a real person, a real character, and nobody quite knew how he did it. But all that research that I did on Britt, when I first read about Britt Johnson, see, I'm attentive to story, I'm attentive to a plot, I'm attentive to these very ancient plots that probably go back to the beginning of humanity 100,000 years ago, when we first learned to speak. And when I saw that Britt Johnson had taken such enormous efforts to go and get his wife back, I saw this is a love story. This is a love story because it's like Orpheus in Eurydice, when Orpheus lost his beautiful wife she was in hell, the Greek version of hell, and he went single-handed and got her back. So these stories resonate. I mean, they have been resonating with us forever, forever. We are the only animals who imagine unicorns. We're the only people who imagine hell. We're the only people who imagine Saturn of the underground coming up and taking away some beautiful woman for his wife and taking her down to hell. So this is, and the imagination can be terrifying and frightening, but it's better to be scared in the imagination than otherwise. So I've been 4 and 5 hours a day at this, and people ask me about, I write a blog, and people ask me about what I do to get out of the world of the imagination. So for many of us writers, getting out of it is just as hard as for other people getting into it. And I write about things that keep me from getting too much involved in the world of the imagination and not being able to get out of it. But I do want you to think about that. I want you to think about the fact that only writing is completely non-sensual. There's no sensual input. There's no reward for your senses. Any of the 5 senses, when you write, you're entirely in the world of language, in your mind. It's the only art that is like that. You have written some questions, which I will be happy to answer. And from what I can tell, the questions are about content, about the actual content of the book. And I will be happy to answer all of those as well as I can. But I just wanted to get in the abstract before we got down to the specific.
We got a lot of great questions submitted. A number of them go to what is probably both a mechanical and artistic judgment. Why no punctuation for speech?
Okay. I get asked this a lot, and before I answer it, I am going to answer it, but before I answer it, I went to Cormac McCarthy's books and looked at all the Amazon reviews on there, and not one person complained about the fact that he does not use, so I'm going to make you all ashamed of yourselves, that he doesn't use quotation marks. And on all I'm getting a lot of Amazon reviews on News of the World, and there are a lot about every 4th or 5th person complains about it. So that's not fair. But I'll tell you why, and that is because when I was a kid and I was reading, they don't do it anymore, but it used to be that British novels didn't use quotation marks at all. They just used dashes, if you recall, if anybody remembers that. And I really liked it. It had a freeing feeling to it. And after a while, it felt that when I go back and reading American novels with a quotation point, it looked like it was people's speech was being held inside a barbed wire or something, and I didn't like it. And then I read Cormac McCarthy, and he just threw them out, and I thought, that's so bold, that's cool. So I did it too.
Good. Great answer. Thank you. There's several questions I think could be under the heading of sort of the historical
Right.
accuracy of parts of the book.
Right.
Let me toss one out here. This person writes, one of my favorite parts of the book was the use of the dimes in the shotgun shells. Was that a historical tidbit or did you make it up? And in case you're worried, they say it was wonderful.
Okay. I do a lot of research, of course, on the internet, and I was looking up, I wondered what kind of a shotgun he would have been carrying. A shotgun, of course, is just a utility instrument, especially at the time for varmints or for, shooting rabbits or doves or whatever, birdshot. So I went to YouTube and I typed in, 1870 shotgun. So all these, videos came up, and one of them was 3 young guys who went out to the city dump with a 12-gauge shotgun and started loading to see how many different things they could load into it. And they were shooting these old microwaves and old computers. And if anybody hates technology, this is the YouTube video for you. And they were just flying a piece. And they were loading these shotgun shells with like frozen gummy bears and frozen Vienna sausages. And one guy said a U.S. dime is the only U.S. coin, that will fit into a 12-gauge shotgun shell. And the light went off because I thought, oh, he collects dimes. And they were talking about how they will fly farther and faster. So that just set up the whole scene for me. So that's where I found it.
Oh,
And no, I
terrific.
have not tried it.
They had quite an impact.
It had quite an impact, yes.
We got, as you can imagine, a number of questions about the captain.
Yeah.
Was he based on a real person?
Right.
Did lots of people do the reading of the news in the way that he did? Could you give some of the background of how he came to be created in your story?
Sure. I ride with a group of girlfriends, and one of them, June Chisholm, her husband, Wayne Chisholm, is from an old North Texas ranching family. And I was over at their place one night having dinner, and he mentioned that his great-grandfather had gone around North Texas reading the news from newspapers that he got from distant places. He said he never read local news because there'd be a fight before he finished the article. So he read from places far away. And I thought, oh, that's a great character. That's terrific. I said, could I have that? And he said, sure, he's dead. I mean, what's he going to do? So go ahead and take him. And so he appeared first very briefly because I was just finishing The Color of Lightning at that time. And he appears very briefly in The Color of Lightning, but I knew he was going to be the center of a whole book because that's just too good a character to pass up. So that's how I came about him. And June and Wayne sent me photographs, old family photographs of Captain Kidd, and his name was Caesar Aloysius Kidd. And he looks just like he looks in the book. He was a very distinguished-looking man with a short top hat and silver hair and a Van Dyke beard. So, yeah.
One of the questions that we also got several of, and you've just answered it a moment ago, but I thought maybe just give a chance to repeat it. Why does he not read local news?
He doesn't read local news because people are going to get into fisticuffs over local news. He stays away from Texas politics because, as you so well pointed out in your introduction, which I thank you for very much, it was well done, pointing out the parallels, is that people were going to get into fights. And he couldn't afford fights because then word would get around that Captain Kidd's coming to town, oh boy, let's start a fight. He's there to read the news. And secondly, he wanted to move people into the world of the imagination using language. So this book has got a kind of double entendre to it. First of all, the main character, Captain Kidd, knows about the world of the imagination. He wants to move people into it, and he does it under the pretense of offering news, especially the news. Well, for instance, the Hansa, the ship that was exploring in the Arctic that went down. What did Texan know about the Arctic? so it moves him into this magical world. You know, there's people in furry suits, and there's beautiful white bears that climb over glass mountains, icy mountains, and so it just carried them away. So for those two reasons is why he avoided local news. Captives have been taken in America from the very early times. There were the sisters who were taken in Arizona, Oatman, the Oatman sisters who were taken. She did return, and she managed to readjust somewhat. They were taken, I think, in the 1850s. I believe it was before the Civil War, when they were crossing Arizona trying to come to California, and their names were Oatman. And they did return. She returned. Her sister died while they were living with the tribe, but half the tribe died off because they were in a terrible state of starvation. For some reason, I don't think the rains came or something, but she was not killed. They were very much integrated with the tribe. So from a very early time, captives have been taken from both the Anglo communities and lots and lots from the Hispanic communities in Texas and New Mexico, the Kiowa and Comanche raided. And they took captives from each other. I mean, you know who Sacagawea was. She was a captive. I believe she was originally Shoshone, and she was taken captive by, I forget, another tribe. And she was with that tribe when she guided Lewis and Clark across the mountain. So she herself was a captive between two tribes. So it seemed to be an old custom, and I'm not really sure why or how that worked, but maybe it was like the Irish, who always gave hostages. Among the Irish tribes in Ireland in pre-Christian times, if they made an alliance with another Irish king, the two kings exchanged their sons as captives or hostages or guarantees of good behavior. Maybe it was something like that, I'm not sure. But these children had a terrible time in readjusting and coming back to Anglo or German society. They tended to be alcoholics. They tended to have very poor impulse control. They didn't understand anything anymore about white society or why people had roofs or why would they put shoes on their feet. They couldn't grasp it, so they just had a really difficult time. Johanna was lucky in that she had one person, the captain, to pay attention to her, to encourage her, and to try to help her readjust into life. But mainly they were just thrown back into an extended family, and half the time their parents were gone. So they had a really hard time, you know, and I don't know, I'm not sure why.
Well, you have that wonderful Irish character in the book.
Dora.
Dora, and
Yeah,
even in the end, you refer the reader back to her words about the double creation, or being created twice for these children.
That's right.
And how destabilizing that experience was for them.
That's right. So when we were brought up to be, when we enter into the cultural world as children, we get older and older, and we begin to adopt our own culture. That is asking the human being to really restrict themselves in many ways and to resist their impulses in many ways, and then to do it a second time with a culture that is so very, very different would be almost impossible for a young person to survive. So they stuck with the one that they knew last. That's all I can figure out. I'm no expert.
There was one reader has a question, interesting one about choice, and they were wondering, why did you choose to have her ages 6 to 10 in captivity as opposed to, say, 4 versus 8? And I think maybe the assumption in the questioner is that at 6 they would have had more stay with them that wouldn't have peeled away so quickly. I don't know if that's true in terms of child development, but how did you pick the age
it's
to
not
have
true.
her? It's not true.
No, if she had been taken at age 4, she would never, ever have readjusted, ever. Cynthia Ann Parker was taken at age 9. She was the wife of Peter Nakona, and her son was Quanah Parker. He was the last survivor, the last holdout of the Comanche. He was with the Antelope Band, And Ronald McKenzie, a lieutenant colonel of the United States Cavalry, finally ran him to earth in Palo Verde Canyon. And so she was famous because she had been taken as a captive, and she was also famous because she was the mother of the last Comanche chief to hold out. She was taken at age 9, and she was returned to her people when she was, I think, 25, and she starved herself to death rather than live among white people. So if Johanna had been taken, I think, any younger than that, I don't see her ever readjusting. So I made it a little bit later.
Interesting. A question, this may come back to the writer's craft a little bit more in the character of Johanna. She's having, as part of this adjustment and readjustment, to navigate several different languages, Kiowa, English, German, that she'd gotten at different points.
Right.
And I'm interested in that process, and then what one of our questioners is really interested, was it difficult to write her efforts to speak in English with these other influences, and how was it a challenge to try to capture how her words would have sounded given those
Right.
various influences?
Right. Well, she had forgotten her other language, German. She was raised speaking German. And Kiowa, she had learned Kiowa. And Kiowa is a tonal language. It's like Chinese. Chinese has 4 tones. And Kiowa has about 9 tones. And they're not as distinct as the 4 Chinese tones. It's a beautiful language. And as you can imagine, it's very musical, very musical. Their legends are intact. For some reason, the Comanche lost all their legends and all their ritual, but the Kiowa did not. So this is the language she has learned to speak, and it's very subtle, and she is very sharply attuned to every shift in tone with 9 tones. You can imagine the kind of ear you have to develop, and you have to develop it very quickly as a child because she wanted to survive. So when she returns, probably English and German seemed very crude to her and very simply learned. English does not have the grammatical structure that many other languages have. German, for instance, of course, has declines the noun, that has cases. English does not. So I spent very little time on her trying to relearn German. First of all, because I don't speak it. I don't speak it very well. I can fake it. That's what writers do. We fake it. So I had her just go straight into English. So English would have seemed very bare bones to her, very, very easy. Yeah.
I have to say, one of the things, too, I thought was marvelous is the way words started tumbling out of her, as if a dam had been broken, and my sense is somehow, especially for children, that can happen, that suddenly just something starts to flow.
It starts to flow, exactly. As soon as you learn the difference between shoe and foot, everything seemed to start happening for her. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to shift gears with this question in a whole dramatic direction. But we're in Southern California, the entertainment capital of the world. So, has anyone approached you about making your book into a movie or television series or the like?
This is a setup. Yes.
No, it's not.
Yes, I have signed with 20th Century Fox, and thank you. And Tom Hanks will play the captain. So.
That's wonderful news.
I was very, very happy about it. I'm just absolutely delighted. And the guy who did I believe it was an award-winning script for Lion, is doing the script. So I'm delighted. I'm so happy. I mean, they seem so real to me, the captain and Johanna. And of course, they have to in order to write a book about them. But for people to love them as much as they do, and for people of such talent to take the book and take it seriously, it's like a wonderful thing.
It is a wonderful thing, but can I ask you an unfair question about
that?
An
unfair question.
How would you feel about someone who encounters them only through the film and never reads the book?
I don't know. We'll have to see what the film is like. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I suspect you'd prefer reading over viewing.
Exactly. I know. I don't mean to say that reading is superior.
But we're all here because it is, right? Yeah. Well, a couple more thank yous since we've come to the end of our time. First, thank you all for being here this afternoon. I think also a thank you to the Thousand Oaks Library and its director, Heather Cousin, for the One City, One Book program. What a terrific treat. And above all, thank you to Paulette Jiles for being with us and for writing such a wonderful book.